The biggest challenge and the most fearful aspect of this film was to accept that I will not know what the film will be until the final mixing stage. And more I do my films that way. I accept the possibility of failure, and I accept the fact that the creative process is not interesting unless you accept that you don't always know. So it's the story of this guy called Gordon who lives in Detroit, and he works for a surveillance company that checks over pipelines in northern Africa. But he does that remotely by handling hexapods, which are robots that have these little cameras on them. So he's in Detroit, handles this hexapod that is like handled that moves in northern Africa. But at the same time, he just got dumped by his girlfriend, and he's starting to ask himself a lot of questions about life and about love. So as he's working, he finds in the desert a forbidden couple that meets every now and then and that have plans for the future. And he starts spying them rather than looking over the pipelines. And strangely, this story becomes a story about modern relationships in the 21st century and how we interact, how men and women interact, and how do we find true love. So Gordon is this down-to-earth guy who believes in certain traditional values about relationships, about love and about fidelity. And when his girlfriend dumps him, they've been high school sweethearts. He gets like thrown into this new kind of relationship system where, it's with Tinder-like apps and people meet over the internet and stuff like that. And he's just not comfortable with that, with trying out relationships, meeting 10, 15, 20 people a week. And he's just like really not comfortable in that. And he's seeking something that he can relate to, like something that is more meaningful in his life. Joe I discovered through his agent who introduced me to him at CAA. And I hadn't heard of him before, and it turned out that he was quite known in the UK from his TV series Peaky Blinders. And when I saw his work, the thing that struck me is his ability to really go to the roots of the emotion. And that's one thing that's kind of becoming rare in our world. The younger actors, I find, it's harder and harder to find actors that are able to really hit the note and take out all their masks and in a way reveal themselves. I believe that actors shouldn't have like 100% mask hiding who they are. They should use their own personality, and their personality should permeate through the character. And I guess that requires a lot of courage because, in a way, kind of like a singer on stage, you're also revealing part of your true self. So it's not just like making fake or making believe. It's like it's really part of who you are that makes you a good actor. So Joe really had that. And so Ayusha, she's on the other side of the ocean, and she has a very different problem than Gordon. She's kind of like in a situation where families have organized marriages, I guess you can say, and she's not comfortable into that, and she wants to be a modern woman who should decide for herself who she would like to be with for the rest of her life. And so that's how these two people collide. They kind of like have the same questions about love and having relationships, but at the same time, their backgrounds are completely different. And I discovered Lina through our casting agent in France, who is an amazing and talented young woman, Mathilde Snodgrass, who did also Inglourious Bastards. When we got Lina, she was already casted for 2 or 3 lead roles in feature films, and she's just coming out of acting school. So she has really a recognized amazing talent. She's an upcoming actress that people will discover very, very, very soon. I mean, she's really breathtaking, and she really has this charisma that's like, you put the camera on her and she takes all the space. It's really amazing. That kind of charisma, you're born with it. You can't learn it at school, you know? I woke up one day and I had this image. In a way, it dawned on me that it should be like kind of a simple story because it was quite complex to make, but this simple story about 2 characters asking themselves questions about love, but they live on 2 different countries. One thing in the way I like to work with actors is to try to find a physical link to bringing them to the emotional state of the scene. Meaning that if a psychological state should like make your blood flow and make you short of breath and all of that, sometimes I'll find a kind of mechanism that'll bring you to that physical state, and then the actor can focus on the psychological and the inner emotion, but the body has this kind of state where it's like it kind of matches the psychological state of the actor without him having to fake it. Kind of approach where prepping before a scene, he'll get really, for example, he could get completely mad and like hit walls, and I literally saw him preparing for a scene and punch in the walls and make a hole through the wall. That was for preparation, and that got us scared a little bit, but that's all to get us through to the state right after. And Joe has that kind of thing where the physicality of the emotion is there. For this particular character, where you have a character that looks at a screen for a long time and has this relationship, and you have to follow his evolution of torments, all the while him being many times just facing a screen. It was amazing to see that commitment from Joe to really prepare before each take and like do push-ups and go through extensive physical preparations to get into that state of mind. And once he would get into that real state of mind, that really authentic, even when we would cut, and he would keep that moment. And sometimes you could feel on set that tension from all of us, because you knew that Joe was really into that moment. It wasn't faking, it wasn't the mask, it was him getting himself entangled in the character's emotions.
Actually, I think we should just redo it in case we want to use the whole line.
The script took many iterations, and over the years it used to be 3 stories that would take place in India, in Northern Africa, and in America. And over a course of quite a couple of years, it dawned on me that it should be just this exploration about modern relationships and this kind of like postmodern exploration about how people communicate as well through different medias such as the internet. And I guess that the way Gordon communicates with her via a small robotic spider is kind of a metaphor for how today we're trying to interact through apps and internet. And are we really getting closer to each other because we're always in communication, or are we getting farther apart? Or is it just like very generic relationships, whereas the deeper relationships are kind of getting lost? But it's the second time I worked with Pierre-Yvain, producer Pierre-Yvain, and we did together War Witch, which took place in the Congo. And what I really like about Pierre is his trust of the creatives of his team, and also his kind of like feeling for stories that can be bigger than life. This kind of openness to creating films that are fables. And I guess that I and Juliet, in a sense, is such a fable. And I like to work with people over and over again when the relationship works, because we can work on whatever we need to work on as a team, but we grow out of that. And it makes it easier and easier over the films to just communicate. But yeah, Pierre really gives me a lot of freedom to follow my vision. And in the case of I and Juliet, it's true that there are a lot of elements that we are still discovering in editing. There are all of these facets of the film, how we approach the different worlds and how we overlap between the different realities. That's all to be discovered in editing. And I guess all of my team, including Pierre, I was lucky that they would trust me that these answers still need to be answered in editing. We covered our bases, but now it's fun because we're still crafting the object, the film. There was one major menace to the film with the fact that we had to shoot different parts, Morocco first, America after, and not being able to go back to Morocco because of funding issues, of course. It was planned that we would shoot, but narratively the stories intertwine each other. But there was also a really good special weapon, I would say, of time that was fun, shooting in 2 different countries at the same time. So the biggest challenge was to anticipate what was needed to be filmed in order for the overlapping stories to work, and without having shot the American part. So I really had to storyboard some of the scenes thoroughly to make sure that we understood what was needed for when our actor in America was watching his screens and looking at what he was seeing in Morocco. Not just filming the characters' stories, but also taking care of the point of view of Gordon, who's kind of peeping on people's stories in Morocco. So that was really, really challenging, and we couldn't have done it without extensive preparation. But then what was really cool is that, maybe a blessing in disguise, Joe had to go film in Thailand, which delayed the production for the American part. So it gave us almost 2 months of downtime, which turned out to be preparation time, obviously. But that allowed us to really prepare the POVs in the computer screens, and really design what Gordon sees in his screens, and think about how I can organize the filming so that Joe doesn't have to act like a robot to pre-film stuff. For example, I really put an emphasis on bringing Lina, whose scenes are all in Morocco. I still emphasize the importance of bringing her to America to be able to answer to Gordon's lines, so that it doesn't feel like it's a robotic guy answering to pre-recorded lines. And so, in a way, when we came back to Montreal, we were in this dry Stalinian building, and which was part of the story. But obviously, the actual filming wasn't as poetic as being in Morocco, obviously. So it was kind of but that was part of the contrast. That was part of how the film, of how I wanted the film to be. I wanted to create that contrast of this blandness, 90-degree angle, North America versus the desertic landscape of Morocco. So this is my first feature film collaboration with Christophe Collette. I had worked with him once or twice on advertisement projects, and what really impresses me about Christophe's work is his technical mastery of whatever's new, and at the same time he's very aware of the old ways of filmmaking, such as using film stock, for example, which is kind of coming back. It's becoming trendy again. He knows a lot about the different techniques to create film, and he takes a lot of chances in the visual medium as well. He brought forward the idea of using gimbals combined with Steadicam technology in order for us to create the POVs of the hexapods, the points of view of the hexapods, which is kind of one of the first times I think that we're using the combination of the gimbal with the Steadicam. He has a huge range of knowledge that really influences his work as a DP. It's really important for a director of photography to be able to have cultural references when you're talking about a film, visual and cultural references. So I guess I didn't let it show, but the hexapod generally made me very, very insecure about, will this film work? Because you're creating this kind of little creature and you don't know how the spectator is going to relate to it. And it's really important when you're doing film, I find, to kind of have this, to streamline the tone of the film. And that hexapod is a huge element of let's hope it works, So the key element for me was to have a real robot instead of 3D imagery, which for me, there's never the same soul as real robotics or real elements in the screen. It's really hard to convey the physicality of a real element through 3D imagery. So that hexapod for me, what was important is that it's flawed, is that we make it flawed and crappy, and when we start in the movie, it has to be dispensable, like a throwaway. It has to be something that costs maybe not $50, but when it's broken, you don't bring it back to the store. You just abandon it and bring another one. And that made him in a way frail and in a way moving or touching, I guess, the fact that it's a throwaway. And I guess maybe there's a metaphor for that in today's commercialization and how we use people as, and how maybe people are also replaceable, unfortunately, in our multinational corporate world. So the way I had to work with the robot basically is I would work with the puppeteer, which was Andrew. I would talk to Andrew as if he was an actor basically. What were his motivations? And I guess with Andrew not being an actor himself, I would direct him kind of like a younger actor, where I would be more directional and impose more of my vision of how the actor, the hexapod should move, where I wouldn't do that to an experienced actor. I would give him his psychological motivation. In the case of the hexapod and Andrew, I would be more directive of how the actual hexapod should move. And then it required a lot of leaping faith from Lina, to tell her, listen, this is a moving scene, you're talking to a little crappy robot, and you need to get the emotion out there. Your emotion will make the hexapod alive. If you don't truly, completely believe in your relationship with the hexapod won't have a life. It's you who will make him alive. I guess I feel so privileged to have the freedom to look for cool stories wherever they are and then just go there. And I feel that modern North American suburbia has been covered tremendously and very well. And I don't feel I can bring anything more that's been covered. So I feel that if I'm going to talk about, for example, my country or my North American environment, I'm going to try to find angles that are new. So I and Juliet has that angle. It talks about North America, but I feel that we're touching on new grounds that we didn't address before, but that are, I hope, that are relevant to our thought process. And also there's just that cool factor that's important to me. Is that a cool story to tell? Are people going to be entertained by it and are going to have a good ride? There's something musical about choosing subjects I find in film. So our production designer, Emmanuel Fréchette, already worked on 2 of my previous films, and this is the 3rd film we're doing together. And I have such a unique, wordless relationship with Manu. It's amazing. It's really unique. I can't explain it, but sometimes I'm going to have an idea, and literally he would call me the next day and he would tell me, Kim, I had this realization about what this film should be, and we're connected. And it's almost as if we had this kind of telekinetic communication. So it's really unique. But at the same time, which is really powerful, and what I love about my working relationship with Manu is that he takes it to another level. I mean, production design is, for me, it's one of the hardest jobs in filmmaking. And I find that perhaps it's not recognized enough. I find that perhaps production design and editing is not recognized enough. In the case of I on Juliet, what dawned on us is that we have this uninhabited desert, and we have this one element, that pipeline, that blue pipeline, that slices the desert in 2. And it's weird because it's so simple, but at the same time, it turns the desert into a contemporary work of art. I mean, Manu was able to build almost half a kilometer of pipelines, real pipelines, that interacts with the sun and the desert, and it's already pre-rusty and all of that. And that choice of blue, it really turns the desert into a contemporary work of art. And all through our work in the desert, that was kind of how it worked. And it was Manu who really brought forward that vision. And in the case of North America, we wanted the Gordon's workplace to feel almost like a telemarketing agency, really bland, beige. And then to link those 2, we made sure that the hexapods have kind of that, that boring beige, computer beige. We put some of that on the hexapods cappings, and it kind of relates to Gordon's work in his bland, beige workplace. You're always rewriting the story according to what your gut feeling tells you the story should be. So for this film, since we're talking about modern relationships, we have hexapods, which we will discover in editing how they will interact and what kind of voices we're going to hear. That was really the biggest challenge.